how's it going? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Gabby, and today we're going to be doing another round of some thriller book recommendations. I have done so many videos about thriller book recommendations in the past, so if you've missed any of the previous times that I've done this, I'll have them linked down below. I think this might be the 15th time that I've done this. I've been reading and recommending thrillers here on booktube for over 10 years at this point, and even though I don't read thrillers as often as I used to, I have been reading some really great thrillers in the last couple of months. I think the last time that I actually posted one of these recommendation videos was in October last year, and I already have 12 more books that I can recommend to you. So it's safe to say that things have been looking up, and I feel like I've been falling back in love with thrillers all over again. You know, one of the downsides of reading thrillers all the time is when it starts to affect your sleep, whether that's because you're getting spooked by the actual book that you're reading, or when you get that feeling and you just want to stay up all night reading. I didn't even realize how bad my sleep was until I fixed it, and that's all thanks to today's sponsor, which is a new sponsor on my channel, and that is Dream. It's no secret that I've never been a really good sleeper, because some nights I'm just tossing and turning for hours trying to fall asleep. And then the worst thing is when you wake up in the morning and you feel even more tired because you had such a restless sleep. And that's why I'm really excited to be working with Dream, because not only does it help me fall asleep faster, but it also helps me stay asleep throughout the night. And when I wake up, I feel so much more refreshed and well rested. I also love that it's become a cozy little nighttime ritual that I can look forward to. I also just really love the flavor. It's basically like this hot chocolate, and the flavor that I got is the sea salt caramel, but they have so many different fun flavors to try. And then within 30 minutes, it has me feeling so tired and ready for bed. And what I really love about this is that these are all ingredients that I'm familiar with. You know, we're talking about melatonin and magnesium, just to name a few, but they also do offer some blends that are melatonin free. And I can't emphasize enough how important it is to get good sleep at night, because it helps with your energy, it helps with your memory. There are so many benefits to getting a good night's sleep. So if you're struggling with falling asleep, staying asleep, or waking up feeling exhausted, Dream has been an absolute game changer for me. And now you can try it yourself with my code gabbyreads for up to 35% off. Just click the link down in my description, and thank you so much to Dream for sponsoring today's video. And now let's get into the books. Alright, so kicking off this recommendation list, this has got to be like my #1 recommendation. Like, if you're gonna take one book recommendation from this video, let it be this one, because that is My Husband's Wife by Alice Feeney. I am so thrilled that I love this book as much as I did, because Alice Feeney is really one of my favorite thriller authors writing today, but some of her books in the past have been a little bit hit or miss for me, but I think this might be a contender for like my new #1 favorite from her. And I'm so thrilled that I love this one as much as I did, because this was actually a book troop pick earlier this year, and we have a live show discussing it, so I will have the live show link down below if you want to hear all of our thoughts on it. But this book was absolutely fascinating. We're following this woman named Eden, and one morning she goes on a run, and when she comes back to her house, weird things start happening. Like, her key isn't working in the lock of her front door, and she's like, what's going on? And then this other woman answers the door, and she's like, who are you? And this absolute stranger is like, oh, I'm Eden Fox. And she's like, what? No, like, I'm Eden Fox. And it's even weirder because her own husband doesn't recognize her, and he's like, who is this crazy person outside? It's almost like she's dropped into some alternate reality where she no longer exists, and there's like another woman who's posing as her. Oh my gosh, talk about like worst nightmare scenarios, right? Like, I would be so horrified if this happened. But this is the kind of thriller that has so many layers, because that is only the beginning of this story, and there is just so much to unpack here. I also love that in this book, you're not only getting Eden's perspective in the present day as this is happening to her, but you also do get dual timelines. So you're also following this woman named Birdie, and you're reading from her perspective 6 months ago. So I really love that in a thriller when you're going back and forth between two different perspectives, and they were both so intriguing. I really couldn't decide which perspective I preferred over the other, because they were both so compelling. Not only that, but like the ending of this book gets so twisty. We were talking about this on the live show, but like towards the second half of this book, there are so many plot twists that it's actually kind of crazy and so impressive that Alice Feeney was able to pull this off. So I genuinely think that you would enjoy this, because even if there is something that you saw coming, there's probably something else that you didn't. Another recent thriller that has just published that has instantly become one of my new favorites is This Story Might Save Your Life by Tiffany Crum. This book just published in the month of March, and it is absolutely everything. I really love the way that this book got pitched as Lisa Jewell meets Emily Henry, because there's a really good balance of like thriller and romance in this book. So I especially would recommend this one to romance readers, because there is a very compelling romance happening in this book as well. But in this story, we're following these two best friends, Benny and Joy, and we follow them over a period of like 10 years. We get to see when they first met in flashback chapters that are told from Joy's perspective. And these two best friends, they decide to start this comedy survival podcast together that's called This Story Might Save Your Life. And over this period of 10 years, we see how their friendship develops over time, and we also see their podcast, you know, really take off and become very successful. And then in the present day timeline that's taking place 10 years later, we're following from Benny's perspective, and one morning Joy goes missing, and the police have reason to believe that he might have been involved in what happened, so they're really looking into him as a potential suspect. So what I really loved about this book is getting those multiple timelines. Like, I loved getting Joy's Molly's perspective in the past and Benny's perspective in the present, and it was so engaging. Like, the mystery in this book was actually so good. It was so fascinating. I also love reading books that are about podcasts in this way. I loved learning more about their podcast, and like, this is the kind of podcast where like they're getting millions of downloads and streams. So their podcast is like kind of a big deal. They're getting all of these really big brand deals. There's a lot of public attention on them, which only makes things feel more crazy when Joy goes missing. I just loved the writing in this so much, and the characters were so good, and the romance was so juicy. This one just checked a lot of boxes for me, and I highly recommend. And then another thriller that I very recently read and I absolutely loved has got to be Man of My Dreams by Olivia Worley, and this one that I have is actually an ARC copy. This book is going to be publishing in June. So sadly, this one is not currently available yet, but I do believe that you can still request this one on NetGalley if you wanted to read it early. But this thriller was absolutely everything! And this is another one that I would highly recommend to, you know, romance readers as well, because this book also has a very compelling romance story in it too. I've been loving lately finding thrillers that have like the perfect balance of either like thriller and horror or thriller and romance, because I'm such a big reader of all three of those genres, so like that really pulls me in. And this book is another one that had so many elements with like things that I love in books, because we're following this woman named Ivy, and she is a romance author in this book, and she's living in New York City. She had a very successful debut book that recently came out, and now she's working on her second book when she runs into this man in the city, and she's very freaked out because this guy Liam that she meets, he is nearly identical to the book character that she's currently writing as the love interest in her next book, down to all of the details. Like, his name is Liam, he's an architect, he's good looking, he's charming, like he checks all the boxes of this character that she's currently working on, and she's like, how is this possible? I just really love a book with a fun premise like this. Like, that is so crazy. And this is another book that had so many layers, and it really surprised me because we're not only getting her story, you know, in the present day, but we do get some flashback chapters that took place like 11 years ago. And this main character, Ivy, she has a really mysterious past that you're also trying to figure out like what happened to her in the past. This was so well written and so engaging. I devoured this entire book in one afternoon. There were some twisty things that happened towards the end of this book that I was 100% shocked by, not expecting at all. And this one was so much fun. I highly recommend checking this out when it comes out in June. The next book on this list is going to be one that's more of a literary thriller, but it ended up being one of my top favorite books that I read last year, and that is Heartwood. This one is definitely more on the literary side when it comes to thrillers, but I do think that if you enjoy reading thrillers, this one is an absolute must read. It is so good because in this book, we're following the story of this woman who is 42 years old and she went missing on the Appalachian Trails, following from multiple different perspectives. But you do hear from this woman, Valerie, who went missing, and you read from her perspective in letters that she's written to her mother. You also get the perspective of this woman named Beverly, who is kind of like the detective that's working on the case and trying to find her. And then you also get the perspective of this 76-year-old woman named Lena, who is like a bird watcher, and she's retired in the community, and she's also trying to help solve the case of this missing woman. And this book was just so gorgeously written, like I can't even tell you. It was beautiful. It nearly made me emotional. I think if you enjoyed the book Wild by Cheryl Strayed, then you would really enjoy this because there's something about the way that this book talks about nature that was just so beautiful, and it really resonated with me. But I also think the mystery in this book is very compelling and very interesting. I love the way that this book talked about motherhood and just like what it means to be a female in this world in general. This is the kind of book that makes you think about humanity and the world and our place in the world and the importance of connecting with nature. And like, I could go on, but I absolutely loved this, and I thought the mystery and the thrills in this book were really good. Another thriller that I read at the end of last year that I really loved is King of Ashes by S.A. Cosby. I've read almost everything by S.A. Cosby now, and I do think this is one of his best. I think Razorblade Tears is still like my #1 favorite, but this has got to be a close second of mine. In this story, we're following this character named Roman, and his family has this like crematory business back in Virginia. He's working as a financial advisor in Atlanta when he gets a call from his brother, and he says that his dad was involved in a hit and run and he's recently passed away. So this story is about how he's going to be going back home and trying to help his siblings, you know, through the death of their father. Then he also finds out that his siblings might be involved in something really dangerous back home. And this book was just so intense. I feel like S.A. Cosby is one of those authors where like he really knows how to write suspense, and he really knows how to write a book that's going to keep you like on the edge of your seat almost the entire time. But I think what I love most about S.A. Cosby's books is the way that he writes his characters. Like, they all feel so real to me, and I really connected with Roman, especially as a protagonist in this book, and his desire to want to like protect his siblings. The ending of this book also really stuck with me because not only were there some really like shocking moments about the end of this book, but it was also just very terrifying and very memorable, and there was so much heart in this book. So S.A. Cosby is an author that I would highly recommend checking out if you haven't yet. Another thriller that I read at the end of last year that I really loved is Best Offer Wins. This thriller was so entertaining, and I feel like this is one that actually had a lot of different like social commentary on things that I really appreciated. unexpected, because in this story, we're following this woman named Margot, and she is absolutely desperate to get a house. Her and her husband have been dealing with like the insane housing crisis for such a long period of time, and they're trying to get this house, and they have their eyes on this one very specific house that they really want. And so this book is kind of about how like Margot starts to become obsessed with the current owners of this house, and she's kind of like waiting for them to put it on the market, and it gets to a point where she's kind of like stalking these people, and she's trying to like insert herself into their lives. And this book is just so messy, it's so unhinged. I love the way that this book was written. It was so interesting getting into the head of this character, and I feel like this book also just has a lot of great commentary about, you know, like the housing crisis right now in America, because nobody can afford a home. This book also just had a lot of dark humor to it. Like, I really enjoyed the voice of this character throughout this book. This was such an impressive debut thriller. Like, I cannot wait to read more from this author because this one was so good. Another thriller that just published earlier this year that really surprised me was It's Not Her by Mary Kubica. I've read a lot from this author in the past, and she's had a lot of like hit or miss experiences for me when it comes to her books, but this one in particular really surprised me, and I had a lot of fun with this book. And this is another one of those books where I nearly devoured this entire thing in one afternoon because I just had to know what was happening. The premise for this one is actually pretty generic. You know, like, we're following this woman named Courtney. She's on this vacation with her family, and everything seems to be great until she finds the bodies of her brother and her sister-in-law in the lakeside cottage, and they're both murdered. And then her niece is also missing. And what I like about this book is that, from what I remember, we're flashing back and forth between two perspectives, and it's two different timelines as well. So we're following Courtney's perspective in the present day as she's like discovering the bodies and trying to figure out like what the heck just happened. But then we also do get the perspective of the niece, like the girl who went missing, and we follow from her perspective in the past. I think it's like a week leading up to the events of this murder. So the synopsis of this thriller is like nothing new. Like, I feel like I've read a lot of thrillers that have this exact setup, but there was something about this book specifically, it just really worked for me. It was so entertaining, it was so fast-paced, and I just had a really fun time with it, and I did think the ending of it was pretty surprising. Another thriller that I went into with some pretty low expectations, but I ended up loving it, was Love, Mom. I love that we're following this young woman named Mackenzie, and her mom is this really successful thriller author who is very famous and very popular, but right at the start of this book, her mother passes away, and her mother dies under some suspicious circumstances. Like, they're trying to figure out if it was really an accident. But then on the day of her mother's memorial service, she gets this weird envelope that is signed "From your number one fan, XOXO," and when she opens the envelope, she finds all of these pages of her own mother's diary, and she's trying to figure out like, how would this even be possible, and like, who has access to her mom's diary that she doesn't know about? This book was actually so fascinating because for the first like 100 pages or so, I thought it was okay, but then once we hit part 2 of the book, oh my gosh, I could not put it down. Like, part 2 is absolutely wild. I was tearing through the pages in the second half of this book, and the ending of this book really did surprise me with like how twisty and how interesting it got. Like, there were a lot of layers to this book that I wasn't expecting, and I would describe this as being like the perfect popcorn thriller. This is exactly what I would recommend to fans of Frida McFadden, because I understand the appeal with like reading books by Frida McFadden because you want a book that's just going to be entertaining and you can just like kind of shut your brain off. But I feel like Frida McFadden, at least in my opinion, I feel like her books are written so poorly, and usually the plot twists are either very predictable or they're nonsensical. And so I would definitely recommend reading this instead of Frida McFadden if you're looking for something that kind of has a similar vibe, but the book is actually good. Another thriller that I read pretty recently that also really surprised me was You'll Never Know by Caleb Stevens. This is another one that I went into with very low expectations. I had just been hearing a lot of really good things about this thriller. We're following the perspective of this guy named Grant, and right at the start of this book, he's on this hike with his wife, and while they're on this hike, his wife actually lets him know that she's pregnant with his baby, and then shortly after that reveal happens, there's this white van that like pulls up and abducts his wife right in front of him. And this story just starts off with an absolute bang, you know, of this woman like getting kidnapped right in front of his eyes, and he's trying to track down his wife and like where she could have gone. And this book is non-stop action from that scene until the very end. Like, I swear this book was so crazy. I saw on Goodreads on the description of this book, it says that this is perfect for fans of The Chain, which I would definitely agree with because there's something about this book. It is just so fast-paced and so intense the entire time. But I feel like this is another one of those books that really surprised me because the further you get in, the more layers there are to this story. And there were so many shocking things about this that I did not see coming. I remember I was actually on a walk and I was listening to the audiobook for this one, and I remember there were a few different moments while I was walking that had my jaw like on the floor. Like, what do you mean? It was just so good. It was so twisty. Like, this is the feeling that I want to have while I'm reading thrillers, is the feeling that I had while I was reading this book. Another thriller that I wanted to mention that kind of reads more like a literary fiction is going to be What Kind of Paradise by Janelle Brown. I wanted to mention this book here, even though on Goodreads technically this one is listed under historical fiction, which, like, yes, I guess it does kind of read like historical fiction. I mean, the book's taking place in the 90s, so like it's not that historical, but this one does kind of have like a literary feel to the writing. But I wanted to mention it here here anyway because there is a very compelling mystery and like thrilling aspect to this book, and also because this author has only published thrillers in the past. So this is her writing a little bit more of like a literary thriller or like historical fiction kind of thriller as opposed to the norm, but this book was absolutely incredible. Like, it was so well written, it was so good, so I really wanted to mention it here because in this story we're following from the perspective of this teenage girl named Jane, and she's growing up in the 90s in Montana at this very isolated cabin with her dad, and her dad really keeps her alone at this cabin. Like, she doesn't know anything else about the world outside of this cabin that she has with her dad. And so this is a story about how as she's becoming a little bit older and growing more into a teenager, she's starting to get more curious about the world and curious about what else is out there. And her dad will take these occasional trips away from the cabin for a few days, and so she asks if she can go on one of these trips with him. She starts to realize that her dad might be involved in something that's very dangerous. I don't want to say too much more because the Goodreads description actually gives a lot away, I think, for this book, but if that sounds at all interesting to you, I would highly recommend reading this one, not only because the story is so intense and it's really fast-paced once you figure out what's going on, but also because the writing in this book is really good. I just think this book leans more on the literary side because it really makes you think about like your own childhood and like how you view the world and like how you were raised. There's a lot of really thought-provoking things like that in this book that just really touched me, and I really connected to these characters. Like, oh my god, the characters were just so well written, they were so fleshed out. And then speaking of literary thrillers, another one that I read this year that I really loved is this one called Good Intentions. This one could also be described as a literary thriller because we're following this woman named Katie, and right at the start of this book she loses her sister, who is also her twin, and she's her best friend in the entire world. Like, they are literally so close to each other. On the day that her sister dies, she ends up meeting this other woman in the hospital named Morgan, and Morgan is dealing with the death of her son on the very same day that Katie loses her sister. And so this is a story about how Katie is starting to become obsessed with this woman named Morgan, and I think this one leans a little bit more literary because this one is definitely more of a character study about this woman Katie and about how she really starts to spiral after the loss of her sister and becoming obsessed with this woman Morgan. And this book also just had really great writing and some really thought-provoking things about the idea of having good intentions and how even sometimes people with the best of intentions can still cause harm to others. It was just really good, and like while I was reading this book I kept thinking to myself like, oh my god, like how unhinged is this going to get? It was a really fascinating character study to see this character go through all of these different things in this book, and I just had a really great time. You know, the audiobook for this one is pretty long. I think it's like 14 hours or something like that, but I was so engaged the entire time. And then the last thriller that I have to recommend to you is actually a sci-fi thriller, and that is Baby X. And this one was so incredible and like right up my alley with what I love in a sci-fi thriller. This one talks about how it's perfect for fans of Blake Crouch and John Mars, and like I could not agree more. Like, that is exactly the vibes. And if you have any other sci-fi thrillers that are kind of like this one, I need all the recommendations that I can get because I love shit like this. So this story is taking place in a near future United States, and it says in this near future, advanced technology can create egg or sperm from any person's cells. So basically anybody could create a baby just using your DNA. And this obviously poses like a huge threat to celebrities because if anybody gets access to their DNA, they can create a baby that they never conceived. So in this story, we're following this guy named Trace Thorn, and he is a really big celebrity. He's a singer, and he ends up hiring this woman to be his biosecurity guard. Like, her entire job is to make sure that nobody's getting access to his DNA. But then this story really begins when he gets confronted by this woman Quinn, who claims that she's carrying his baby. It kind of reminded me of like an episode of Black Mirror or something where you're like seeing something that's like technologically advanced, like something that could really help humanity, but you see the dark sides of it. You see how it could all go wrong. And something that I loved about this book too is that we are getting multiple perspectives in this book, so you follow from a few different characters. And this is the kind of book that you could also finish in one afternoon because it's so readable and the chapters are so short. This one really could have been like the perfect 5-star book for me. I think the only reason why I gave it 4 stars instead was because there was a big twist in this book that I definitely saw coming. Like, I thought it was really predictable, so that was a little bit unfortunate. Like, I wish it wasn't as predictable as it was, but I still had such a fun time with this, and there was a lot of other twisty little things that I really found a lot of enjoyment in the second half of this book. So I would highly recommend, especially if you've never read a sci-fi thriller before. I mean, if that's the case, then I would also highly recommend checking out Blake Crouch and John Mars because they have so many good sci-fi thrillers. But this one was also really fun and definitely worth checking out. All right, those are all of the thriller book recommendations that I have for you today. If you've read any of these thrillers, I would love to know your thoughts on them. I would also love to know if you have any thriller recommendations for books that you think that I could enjoy, then please do let me know in the comments. I'm always looking for more thrillers to read, and I'm actually hoping to do another like thriller reading vlog at some point soon, hopefully this month, because there are so many thrillers coming out that sound so good that I really want to read soon, so hopefully I can make that happen. But thank you so much for watching as always. I really do appreciate it, and I'll see you very soon with another video. Bye!